If you want to learn how to play chess, then this is the video for you. I will teach you basics and fundamentals of chess. At the beginning of the game, you need to remember that the chessboard needs to be placed in such a manner that each player has the light colored square on the bottom right hand side. Regarding the pieces, the second row for each side is filled with pawns just like this, and the first row should be set up as follows. The rooks belongs to corner squares, and now moving inward, the knight belongs next to the rooks. Yes, this is called a knight and not a horse. Then next to the knight we have our bishops. After this we place our queen on her matching color, which means the white queen goes on white square and the black queen goes on black square. And then finally we place the queen on the remaining square. If the board is set up correctly, each piece will be facing one another. The queen across the queen and the king across the king. That's how it should be. The player with the white piece always move first and makes one move, and then black makes one move. Each player will make alternative moves like this until the game ends. Each of the 6 different pieces have a unique way of moving. Let's start with the piece which is easiest to understand, and that's the rook. The rook moves in a plus pattern just like this, which means it can move any number of squares either up, down, left or right as highlighted in this position. Rooks can capture the first enemy piece they move into. When you capture an enemy piece in chess, you simply go to the next square it occupies and remove it from the board. Now let's talk about bishops. The bishop can move diagonally and number of squares of in an X pattern just like this. From this position, it can go to any of the square I have highlighted in red. Bishops can capture the first enemy piece they move into. Now let's look at the queen. The queen is considered the most powerful piece on board because it can move both like rook and bishop, which means it can move any number of square vertically, horizontally or diagonally. From this position, the queen can go to any of the square highlighted in red. The queen can capture the first enemy piece it moves into. Let's talk about the knights. The knight moves in the shape of an L, moving 2 squares in one direction except diagonal, and then one square just like that. The knight from this position can move to any of the squares highlighted in red. The knight is the only piece that can jump over other pieces, meaning if there were any pieces here right next to knight, he can simply jump over these pieces and move. If there is any opponent piece on these highlighted squares, he can capture them. Now let's talk about the pawns. The pawn is actually the most complicated piece because it has many unique qualities. A pawn is the only piece that move in one direction and capture in a complete different direction. The pawns move one step forward toward the opponent's side of the board. But if it is their first move, then they can move either one square forward like this or 2 square forward like this. After its first move, the pawn can only move one square forward. So let's just say this pawn moves 2 squares and this pawn moves 1. Each of these highlighted pawns now could only move 1 square forward. Now if white moves his pawn 2 square forward like this, and black also goes 2 squares, you might be thinking that this white pawn can capture this black pawn, but he cannot. Like I told you earlier, pawns move one way and capture in a different way. Remember, pawn can only capture piece diagonally in front of them, and they cannot capture pieces directly in front of them. In fact, this pawn simply cannot may move or capture. He's stuck and has no legal moves. However, this pawn can move forward like this, or he can capture one square diagonally like this. Now you know that pawn only move forward and they never move backwards. But what's going to happen if this pawns gets all the way down to this back rank or row, or if any of these black pawns get down to this back rank? Well, what happen is something called pawn promotion, and what that means is that pawn simply turns into a queen, rook, bishop, or a knight. You can promote it to any of these four pieces. It's complete your choice. Now let's talk about the most important piece, and that is our king. The objective of chess is the checkmate the king. The king is priceless because if you lose the king, you simply lose the game. The king moves one square at a time in any direction. From this position, he can go to any of these squares highlighted in red. Whenever a move results in opponent's king being threatened, then the attack player must say check. So the term check simply refers to the king being attacked. For example, in this position, it's black to move. And if the rook goes to e8, then the white king is in check. He's being attacked and he needs to do something about it. When you are in check, there are three ways you can try to get out of it. You can try to move a safe square, or block the check, or simply capture the checking piece. In this position, white can do all three. He can move to a square. All of these squares have highlighted in the figure. The king can move to any of these. You can also block the check. And by block, I mean to place a piece in between checking piece and the king. Here you can block the check with your bishop just like this. Or you can also capture the checking piece like this. So again, from this position, white can do all three of those. He can move to a safe square, block the check, or capture the checking piece. If you are in check and there is no move to protect the king, then the attacking player declared checkmate. The game is over and he wins. For example, in the position, if the black rook moves to h1, white is checkmate. He is in checkmate because he cannot move away to safe square. He cannot block the check, or he cannot capture the checking pieces well. He cannot go to any of these three squares because the black king guard them. He cannot go to any of these two squares because the black rook guard them. The bishop is not in a position to capture the rook, and nor is the bishop in a position to block the check. For this reason, the king is in checkmate and the game is over. Sometimes a chess game can also end in a draw. Let's first look at by the checkmate. Sometimes the chess game ends in a draw. Let's talk about them. First look at the draw by stalemate. In this position, if the queen moves to g3, this is considered a stalemate position or a draw position. Stalemate occurs under the following conditions. It's your turn to move, your king is not in check, and you have no legal moves for any of your pieces. In this position, it's white to move, white is not in check and has no legal moves. All three of these squares are covered by the black queen, and this pawn is always so not able to move. This is an example of stalemate. Now the game can also be drawn by insufficient material. If it's king and knight versus and king, there is no way to win, and the game is draw. Similarly, if it's a king versus a king and bishop, there is a draw. And of course, if we are down to just king versus king, like the kings cannot move next to each other, and the game is the draw. Now let's talk about the 50 moves rule. This is the position neither side is likely to win, and a draw is usually agreed upon. However, even if a game continues, the game will mostly likely still end as a draw. But this time by the 50 rule move. The 50 move rule basically states that if both players make 50 consecutive moves each without making any pawn moves or any capture, the game ends as a draw. A game could also be drawn by threefold repetition, which means that if the exact same position is repeated 3 times during the game, then the game is declared as a draw. For example, in this position, it's white to move. Take a note of pieces. This is the first time we are seeing this particular arrangement. After white moves, then black plays the bishop and black goes back like this. This is now the second instance of exact same position. And if that happen one more time after a few more moves just like this, then it is the third instance of the same position, and hence the game is draw by threefold repetition. Now let's talk about the some special rules in chess. The first one is a special pawn rule, apostle. In this position, it's black to move, and if this pawn moves one square forward, we can capture it since pawn capture one square diagonally. And the same pawn, instead of going one square, let's say it goes two square forward, trying to avoid this pawn from capturing it, well then we have the opposite rule, which say that we will still have the option of capturing the black pawn as if we had moved one square forward. We have the option on our very next turn only, otherwise we lose the right altogether. King side castling. Now similarly, if the kings move two square towards a rook and the rook is placed on the other side of the king right next to it, just like that, that's queen side castling. Now there are a couple of conditions which must be ordered to castle successfully. It must be king's first move, it must be the rook's first move, and there should be not be any piece in between the king and the rook. Those are couples of basic conditions. However, there are two more conditions. In this position, black rook is on e5 and the white king is in e check. And when you are in check, you cannot castle out of that check. That is one rule must you follow. Here's another one. You also cannot castle through check. In this position, for example, white cannot castle queen side since the rook is controlling this square. So you need to remember both these conditions. You cannot castle when you are in check, and you cannot castle through check. Hit the thumbs up if you like this video and don't forget to subscribe.